Good evening, folks. I'm going to give it just a little bit of time here for people to get into the room, and then we'll get started. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Reg Hoyt. I am the chairman of the One Health Working Group here at Delaware Valley University. I'm also the co-chair of Animal Biotechnology and Conservation at Delaware Valley University. As always, we certainly welcome everybody to our One Health webinars. And for those who have not been to one before, let me just give you a little bit of background on One Health. So One Health has really been a concept that's kind of spreading globally. I think we at Del Val may be approaching it a little bit differently, but it is a transdisciplinary approach. And I think putting it pretty simply, it just recognizes that, or gets us to recognize that we're all on this planet together, whether we're people, whether we're animals, plants, the environment, and that our actions have reactions, whether they have positive or negative impacts on other elements of that triad, and they in turn also have positive or negative impacts upon us as well. What our hope is here at Delaware Valley University is to really bring this to all of our students across all disciplines. And we try to do that through a variety of ways. If I can get my slides to go ahead. Okay, and one of those ways is within our coursework. And so all of our freshmen are introduced to the One Health concept within one of our Del Val experience courses, the second one. We also are trying to encourage research from our students and from faculty that, takes advantage of the fact that Delaware Valley University is a very small university. It's always been about the land. This was once called the National Farm School, after all, and that we have opportunities to work across lines that in large universities may be difficult to do. We don't really have big silos here. We just have little humps we have to get across to be able to work with each other. And the other part of this is outreach, and that's what the One Health seminars are all about. Tonight, we've got a really special guest. I am so proud to have him here tonight. It has been a dream of mine when I first heard him speak that we would be able to get him to come for a One Health seminar. And we're very lucky that he has agreed to be here this evening. Thank you, Dr. Pascal Gagneux, for being here this evening. I want to give just a brief introduction from actually our flyer here. But Dr. Gagneux is professor of pathology and anthropology at UC San Diego. He's interested in the evolutionary mechanisms responsible for generating and maintaining primate molecular diversity. He's studied the behavioral ecology of wild chimps in Thai forest in Cote d'Ivoire, population genetics of West African chimpanzees, and differences in Cylic Acid biology between humans and great apes, with special consideration of their differing pathogen regimes. His great concern is that the current surge in interest for comparative genomics is not being translated into direct support for the conservation of primates in their endangered natural habitats. Tonight, he's going to be talking to us about the origins and, the evolution of our species' abilities to alter the planet, which I think for all of us is a really important topic. With that, I will stop sharing, and Dr. Gagneux, it is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I encourage you to use the chat function if you have, or to submit questions. I think we'll have time for question and answers. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you tonight. It's afternoon over here on the West Coast still. So the title of my talk today is Anthropogeny, Explaining the Origins of the Planet-Altering Ape. It's absolutely clear that humans are one of the apes, but people usually fall in two camps. They either consider us to be just another ape, or they focus on the fact that we are the only ape. Some of us have even left the planet with the help of a lot of other fellow humans, as you see on this picture with the astronaut in orbit. But of course, what we're getting to realize more and more is that we are the planet-altering ape. We are causing the 6th mass extinction and are driving the planet now with our technology. And that is, of course, of great concern, not just in the context of One Health, but many other contexts. So let's take a quick look at us and the other apes. So we have, the royal we, as a species, humans have come up with technology that allows us to take photographs from space that you can piece together. If you take them at night, you can actually see that humans have spread across the planet, and where societies are rich enough to afford electricity, they light up the night sky. You can see the Nile Valley. Look at Japan, South Korea. The contrast there to North Korea is very apparent. The Indian subcontinent, look at the United States, the density of lit up cities, or Europe. And in contrast to us, our closest living relatives, the great apes, are found exclusively in places with forests. Great apes make nests every night. They cannot live where there are no trees because they need these tree nests to stay away and keep themselves safe from predators such as leopards, hyenas, lions, etc. So 2 of these great apes, bonobos and chimpanzees, are both equally closely related to humans, which really means the term great ape is biologically wrong. Because if 2 apes are more closer to humans than these 2 ape species are to any other apes, the meaning of great ape is lost. But it's safe to argue that only one of all these apes has become the planetary ape, and a very paradoxical ape, as I like to argue. There is only one other species I know of that exists around the planet, and it's a marine mammal. It's the species Orca or Sinus. Now, interestingly, if I think of a way to demonstrate how differently humans and great apes behave, this is a snapshot of a single day of intercontinental flights before COVID. After COVID, this activity was markedly reduced, but still, our species gets into these metal tools and flies from continent to continent. In contrast, common chimpanzees here in Western Tanzania at Isa are jealously guarding a very small territory of 30 square kilometers with almost no tolerance for any animals from outside their group, except a few females when they come in and are sexually receptive. Our other closest living relatives, the bonobos, show a little bit more of intergroup tolerance, but they hold territories and they do not wander across territories, much less get into planes and fly across the world. So there was a nice thought experiment that my colleague, the eminent primatologist Sarah Hrdy, came up with, and that is the following. What do you think would happen if you put 300 unrelated male chimpanzees into an intercontinental flight from LAX to Zurich, for example, in my home country, Switzerland? It would be terrible, right? After the flight, there would probably be casualties, many of them. And so this makes us feel really good about ourselves. But before you congratulate yourself too much, keep in mind that humans can do terrible things with airplanes. They can, weaponize the airplane itself, or they can use it to drop atomic bombs, killing 100,000 people in one go. So these are some of the most terrible things we do. And in fact, if you want to come up with a list that we do, we are the only ape that does these things. You can start from A and go to Z, astronavigation, beekeeping, bicycling, X-ray, yoga, or ziplining. None of these things have ever been observed in any one of the other apes. Right? So there is something to be said that humans are an unusual ape that do a lot of things, many of them directly linked to culture. Of course, apes have their own culture. We know from decades of studies in several places that certain ape groups use tools in particular ways. They take years to study, to learn how to use a stone hammer, such as this West African chimpanzee you see there. And but they never build upon ideas. What humans are so good at doing is to take an idea and build upon it. So yes, humans use rocks as hammers, such as an Oloan hand axe, but at some point humans figured out that you can actually chip those rocks in a particular way. Chimpanzees put away their hammers when they break. Humans focus on the chips and use those to make blades that they can haft. They discovered pottery, they made glass, they make photovoltaic panels, they make computer chips. All these technologies, by the way, are all based on silicates. So humans are really good at carrying a culture that builds upon pre-existing ideas. And that's the phenomenon known as ratcheting or cumulative culture. And there's precious little evidence for that in our ape brothers and sisters. But I would argue that one of the most amazing aspects of humans is our symbolic capacity. So if I show you this photograph and I ask you, do you know other species that can read tracks? The answer is actually a resounding no. Your dog is very good at tracking the scent of something.
Excuse me, Pascal.
Yes.
Have you been advancing your slides? We're still seeing the slide of the chimpanzee, the astronaut, and the planet.
Wow, I have been advancing my slides. Yes, I'm so sorry. Let me find, oh, thank you for telling me so. How do I fix this? So you're still seeing this slide?
Yeah, try advancing now. See if
any change?
Nope, still the first slide.
Wow, that's a problem. That's a problem. Bear with me for 2 minutes.
Sure.
I'm going to switch computers because I don't know how else I could fix this.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm going to check out. I'm going to put on my other computer. Apologies.
Oh, no problem. I'll come back on to entertain the folks. Hi, folks. So you may have seen in chat that I've already put up there that if you're interested in the recording from this evening or to sign up for upcoming One Health seminars, you can go to www.delval.edu/onehealth, or you can go to library.delval.edu/onehealth, either of those locations. And while we're here, I'll kind of give a plug for our upcoming One Health seminar. So our next seminar is actually going to be on the 6th of April, and it's going to be the author of this book, Thicker Than Water, The Quest for Solutions to the Plastics Crisis, Erica Serino. Island Press has been very helpful in lining up this author for our speaker series, and they will be offering a 30% discount on purchasing the book from Island Press. So keep your eye out for registration for this event, and we'll be able to get you into that. Whoa, there's two of you.
I'm going to check out.
You're getting feedback now from stuff. Yeah, there you go.
Apologies. Here we go.
You have the inhabitants of your ceiling.
Screen sharing. You need to allow me to screen share.
Oh, yeah. We'll do that again here. Let's see here. There, you should be good.
Thank you. Is it advancing now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Is the sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. I really apologize. So I'm going to briefly recap. That will throw me off a little bit. This is when I tell you about how humans are the only ape that live all over the world, as you can visualize from a Landsat image. We know on based on DNA comparisons that we share two very close relatives among these apes, bonobos and chimpanzees. They are in fact more closely related to us than they are to any of the other apes. The only other species I know of that has a worldwide distribution and exists as a single species within its genus is actually orca, which is the killer whales. And we'll talk about killer whales a little bit more in a moment. So this is what humans do in the 20th century, international airline traffic that moves thousands of people across continents. Our closest living relatives, we continue to do so even during COVID, much less so, and it's now picking up again. Chimpanzees and bonobos are restricted to their forests. And, in the case of bonobos, sometimes meet their neighbors, but it doesn't go beyond that. And of course, it would pain us to imagine what unrelated male chimpanzees with a very limited social tolerance would do to each other if you force them to fly for 11 hours from LAX to Zurich. Humans do terrible things with planes. We're not that much better, right? We just have a different way of socially behaving. And we behave differently in many different ways. All these behaviors have never been documented in a chimpanzee. You can train chimpanzees to ride bicycles, but they have never invented the bicycle. You have to enculturate them with human culture. And one defining feature of human culture is that human culture builds upon ideas upon ideas. So you go from an Aldoan hand axe that is just broken a few times to give you a ridge, to Acheulean hand axes, to mounted, hafted little blades that you can shoot, to pottery, to glass, to photovoltaic panels, to computer chips. Chimpanzees have been sitting for thousands of years using the same stone technology and never modify the tools. They just use them to crash their nuts. But it is a form of culture. It's just not cumulative. But I would argue, I'm going to do this exercise with you. So what you see here is a track. It's a footprint. And I'll ask you, what do you see? There is a human footprint, and believe it or not, there are two zebra footprints. The person using the fletched arrow to point out this footprint to me is a Sikwezi, a Hadza man in Western Tanzania. And based on this footprint, he was able to tell me, to interpret that this footprint is in fact his friend Philemon, and very likely his friend Philemon hunted a zebra and caught it successfully. And after that, cattle came through, accompanied by Datoga herdsmen in their sandals. And all of this he was able to deduce from these signals in the sand, not the molecules of scent that your dog would follow, but a symbolic interpretation. And so the ecologist Louis Liebenberg has written an entire book on the art of tracking and arguing that in a way, this is the origin of science, of hypothesis testing. No other animal has been documented to get footprints. In fact, I was talking to David Watts, a famous primatologist, who described to me a chimpanzee looking at a knuckle print of another chimpanzee, and it had rained, and suddenly the animal jumped back because there was a reflection in the water. And wild chimps tend to not get mirror images. So this is an animal that, rather than getting the track of another chimp, was scared by his own reflection in the water that was standing in this track. So this is a little quiz for you. Can somebody volunteer what you see here? What is this track about? Any guess? Reg, you want to venture a guess?
Wouldn't be a pangolin, would it?
No, it's actually, doesn't it look tire-like?
It does.
Yes, so it is a tire, but it turns out it's a sandal of a Hadza person made out of a motorcycle tire. But once you know that people wear old tires as sandals, you are capable of interpreting that. And we don't know of other animals who do that. So Louis Liebenberg's argument is, this might have been the in. Via hunting, using poisonous arrows and tracking the animals, we became expert at symbolic behavior. And our symbolic behavior, we have societies define themselves by shared symbols. You have painted ostrich eggs, ochre that you decorate your body, you modify your body to signal to people your group belonging. We have personal names. We do not know of animals that use and have personal names. These names allow you to build kinship terms and to refer to tribes, to build up reputations. We have shared rituals that animals share, with lots of ritual behavior in animals. Humans make dance and music, also found in animals, and we use those to contribute to our cultural and tribal identity. We have sacred spaces, group identity, shared representations. We have cuisines. Humans are obligate. They cook their foods. All known societies cook their foods, even in the Arctic. And we use this identity as groups to cooperate between groups, but also to compete between groups. So it's both wonderful and terrible. Look at what's happening in Ukraine right now. This is full on, tribalism at national level on full display. Very, very costly. So in the modern world, you have things like, company symbols, all the way to terrible things we're capable to do to each other based on these shared meanings and identities, using a lot of symbolism. So interestingly, just like the other apes, on average, apes develop more slowly than monkeys. But humans took that to an extreme. Right? We have a massive delay of brain development. We're born with a huge brain that ends up being 3 times the size of that of a chimpanzee or a bonobo. And it takes 3 decades for the human brain to mature. And there is a lot of hints that this slow development is actually a fantastic way to take up culture. And one of the targets of what you take up is language. Human children acquire language with absolutely zero active teaching, and they can acquire more than one language if they're exposed at the right time. So language is another feature that honestly immediately tells you, English speakers among the listeners, that I'm not a native English speaker, because I moved to the United States in my 30s. There is not a chance in the world that I could pretend to be from California, because I grew up in Swiss-German-speaking Switzerland. Paradoxically, we have these costly babies that develop and have a long childhood, but human mothers, even before formula and farming, hunter-gathering populations in the last 100,000 years were able to make a baby every 3.5 years on average, whereas all the apes take more than 6 years to make the next live infant. And that might be the reason why we are now found all over the world, and we are endangering the remaining great ape species as opposed to vice versa. The other big difference is that even in societies that have no antibiotics, no birth control, no modern medicine, such as the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Western Tanzania, central Tanzania, about 20% of the adults are actually post-reproductive women. They are grandmothers or aunties, and they are very fit. This is Heidi here sitting down holding a Swiss Army knife. I lent her to cut a gigantic tuber that she and her friends dug out using just digging sticks. And so this post-reproductive lifespan is not really known from any other animals except orcas. Not even elephants have it, and chimpanzees are like at the cusp. Most chimpanzee females die when they run out of eggs around age 50. Many human females will have another 20 to 30 years of life that is very productive and possibly evolved to convey all this cultural package, stories, meaning, norms, language, and cookies, of course, from grandma and food. So if we look at human biology here on the left, things like hand and shoulder anatomy, which is very different from humans and great apes, directly reflects more than 1 million years of stone tool use, almost certainly fiber technology, where we have no archaeology because it rots, and projectile weapons. We know that almost 500,000 years ago in Europe, Neanderthals were taking down dozens of horses with javelin-like spears that flew as well as a modern Olympic javelin. Our psychology seems to be profoundly influenced by things like our complex social networks. We marry across groups, we keep track of the people and the in-laws and the kinships on both sides. We have these cultural transmissions. We have menopause that evolved as a protective mechanism to keep alive these really precious aging females that contribute to culture. There are genetic mutations that are linked to cooking and the use of fire and detoxifying smoke. Our teeth, our tooth morphology, our jaw, the mastication muscles have changed because most of our food can be softened by soaking, pounding, and cooking. We have hyperactive immune responses compared to the great apes, possibly linked to the fact that we live in our garbage. We have home bases, more like baboons, not like the great apes. They change a nest every day, which is a great hygienic practice that we have abandoned because we left the trees, we started settling.
Our brain anatomy has certain features that reflect language, that are lateralized to one side, where you have huge connections between Wernicke's and Broca's area that exist in the apes, but in humans are gigantic, hypertrophied compared to the great apes. We even have activities such as social blushing, which we do irrespective of the amount of melanin we have. It's just in dark humans, people who are not melanically challenged, like I am, you wouldn't see the blushing easily. And blushing was famously called by Darwin the most peculiar of all human emotions. It's an unconscious physiological reaction to realizing that you just violated a social norm. And the bigger your audience, the more you blush. Apparently, you can't blush well when you're alone. And this massively delayed brain maturation allows humans to take on knowledge, cultural norms, what you do, what you don't do, learn languages, and so forth. If you look at the genomic architecture, genetic diversity across population is actually molded by the degree of inbreeding that different societies tolerate. Inbreeding has huge advantages because you keep the same ideas together, but it has genetic costs. And different societies find a different balance between the cost and the advantage of inbreeding. Then we have things like body lice, lactase persistence, people like me from Central Europe who can still drink milk and express an enzyme that's only used in suckling infant mammals. But because my ancestors discovered how to steal milk from another species, and this became so important, I inherited this adaptation. In different human groups, depending on whether their ancestors had grain agriculture or not, they have more copy numbers of an enzyme that allows them to digest the starch from the grains as they chew them. And then there's all kinds of interesting genetic adaptation depending on the landscape and the ecology. A large fraction of Inuits from the high Arctic are actually intolerant of plant sugar. Plant sugar was not part of the Arctic diet. And so if they eat it now, they get really, really sick, and a reflection of the adaptation to local ecology. But I want to talk a little bit what our ancestors might have done in terms of wildlife. So this is the current density of terrestrial megafauna, animals that are, about 100 pounds or bigger, like big mammals. And you can see that the highest concentration is in Africa. If you ask ecologists to look at the ecology of the world and predict where they expect a lot of large animal based on the climate and what food there is, the lower map would be what you expect. So, clearly a lot of big mammals are missing from a lot of places. Why should this be? Well, the only place you still have these huge concentrations of animals is mostly in Eastern Africa, where people have been for a very long time. All other continents where modern humans only arrived in the last 70 to 60,000 years, South America, Australia, Eurasia, wherever modern humans arrived, you had mass extinctions of a lot of the animals. Is this a coincidence, or do you think we might have had something to do with that? A lot of people would argue that humans arrived as extremely powerful hunters with projectile weapons, and they were diminutive little primates, but boy, did they pack a punch. And many of these species of large animals did not realize what hit them until they went extinct. In California alone, in the last 15,000 years, over 40 big mammals went extinct. There used to be 3 species of elephant-like things: llamas, capybaras, tapirs, large horses. They all went extinct. One of the most dramatic things we do is, apply fire to internal combustion engines and steam engines. And so what this is doing is it's driving the climate. We're now the ape that is changing the climate on the planet. And in parallel, what we're doing is we're causing the 6th mass extinction known on this planet. All this seems to have started during the last interglacial, the last 12,000 or so years, where people started to settle before they were farmers and then started to domesticate animals and crops. And why did they domesticate animals? We're not sure about that, but it could actually well be that our incredible hunting success, including the use of these hunting traps that are called desert kites all across the Middle East, led to such hunting success that we actually hunted ourselves out of game. And we had no choice but to start keeping the young animals and selecting them for the ones that were least aggressive, which is the process of livestock domestication. This, of course, led to settlements, and that got bigger and bigger. And at some point, these settlements required people who directed things from above. They had big palaces built. And so that led to the Neolithic, the period of time since we humans have developed agriculture a dozen times independently around the planet, and domesticated grains. And grains give you surplus food. The food is not necessarily much healthier. It's actually less healthy than for hunter-gatherers, but you have much more of it, which means somebody can tax you and steal it and use it to concentrate power. So as amazing as the Neolithic was, it is what made civilizations possible that we are so proud of. It also allowed for poverty, poor health, plunder, politics, and power differentials. And you'd be happy to know that the first animal domesticated, it looks like it was dogs, as deep in time as 30,000 years, and then for a long time, nothing, and then eventually the pig, and then a slew of animals domesticated. Last week, a new result that geese were domesticated in China even before chickens, about 9,000 years ago. And so that was very important for things like One Health, because if we now live with these animals, any diseases they can get, they might get from us, they will get, and we can get diseases from them. I want to go back to East Africa, which is the only place where you have these huge concentrations of mammals. And it turns out that, you usually see pictures of West Africa, in Tanzania, there are 5 million big mammals here in Ngorongoro Crater, but actually the same country has 33 million heads of cattle. And that's partially a problem, but might also be partially the solution, because it turns out that if you read David Weston's latest book called We Alone, he makes the very solid argument that some of the pastoralists in East Africa, such as the Maasai, have actually managed their landscapes for thousands of years and have been part of the success story, part of the reason why these large herds of animals still exist there. So cattle are not only good news, and listening to people who are traditional pastoralists is almost certainly part of the solution of how we maintain endangered wildlife species. All around the world, for farming, you need fields, and for certain fields, you even need irrigation. So you're looking here at Yunnan, southern China, amazing terraforming. The entire landscape has the imprint of humans on it, and this is long before steam engines. This is where you can either keep animals or keep croplands. Very often, these are mutually exclusive. People in Mongolia are not going to be farming soybeans. The soil, the ecological conditions do not allow that, but you can graze animals and then consume animal products, in a way, eating the grass via the animals. This process of starting to produce surplus food and pumping out babies, not at the rate of every 3.5 years, but even, every year you can have a new baby, essentially led to what we're looking at now. We are now past 7 billion individuals on the planet. And that's, the demographic bomb that is extremely scary. And the good news is it's turning around, and it's turning around faster than anybody projected. Part of what allowed us to feed that many people was this invention by these two people who actually got the Nobel Prize, but they also went then on to produce battle gases and many terrible things used by the Nazis, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch. They came up with a way to fix nitrogen that is in an inert form in air and produce nitrates. And they did that in this company, one of the first BASF companies in Oppau, and they stored it, and it all exploded in the very famous explosion in 1921. So fertilizer made from nitrogen from the air is one thing you can produce with this. The other thing you produce with this is explosives, massively used in the militaries. We now have synthetic fertilizer based on this, and synthetic fertilizer, tragically, is either overused or massively underused. And this is something we need to address if we want to stop polluting our waterways and feed the world. Humans now are responsible for a huge chunk of the terrestrial nitrogen cycle. That's how much nitrogen we fix artificially, and that's how we can produce the food that feeds the world. We, of course, continue to gather food in the oceans, but unfortunately, the effort of fishing is not reflected by the success of fishing, a clear indication that we have diminishing returns and we're overfishing the oceans. There are potential great solutions there where you do not overfish in areas that produce most of the young fish, and that allows you to maintain much bigger catches. So here is a summary showing you that, you know, the world population, half of the people alive on the planet today only eat because we have artificial fertilizer. A lot of people don't realize that, especially people who like organic farming. So that we are hooked to synthetic fertilizer. We have to continue using it. These are the prognoses on the right of where we're going in terms of population. The good news is, one of the good things the pandemic has done is it had moved us to 2.1 offspring per woman on average on the planet. And this is a decade earlier than was predicted. So that very crazy population curve is starting to plateau. We might end up with only 9 billion of us, not 11 billion. But all these people want more and more things. Mostly they want things we already have in many rich Western societies: multiple cars, multiple homes, heated homes, cooled homes, tons of toys, all these unnecessary things we fill our garages with. So humans in different societies have a huge footprint on the planet. And the richer these societies, as you can see here in North America and Europe, the bigger the footprint. And sometimes the footprint is huge because locally people are not particularly rich, but there are so many of them, which is true for the Indian subcontinent and China, which is very, very rapidly developing in many, many different ways. Unfortunately, our consumption patterns vary gigantically between different areas. So if you look at global electricity consumption, for example, and you compare the United States to the rest of the world, it puts us in the US in a very strange position when we start arguing with other nations how they should stop burning fossil fuels and consume less. But we already consume way more than anybody else on the planet. So we should kind of, think first before we accuse people of using too much, because we're still these super users, including of plastics, that can end up in the Pacific Ocean, the garbage gyre, as you see on the photograph. And of course, human encroachments happens everywhere, very often linked to either lumber that we like for our nice furniture. Companies like IKEA use a certain percentage of the entire planetary lumber. But then more than that, people are after ores for all, a lot of the renewable energies actually depend on certain rare minerals that are only found in places like the Congo. And this leads to roads that go into these forests. The roads are followed by people, usually desperately poor people who do slash and burn agriculture to eke out a living and grow some cash crops and enough food for their families. And in the process, people come into contact with more and more wildlife that has pretty much been isolated from a lot of repeated human contact over thousands of years. That include things like chimpanzees and flying foxes and bats and raccoon dogs, you name it. So this leads me to briefly address emerging diseases, of which there are many, and we're long done. Unfortunately, we are not done finding new diseases. People have become interested in using DNA and RNA sequencing to try to guess how many viruses might be on the planet. There are millions of viruses that we don't even know about. And so any new opportunity of contact and rapid transport of things to a market or to a new place, including people who come into contact, hop on a plane, and then the next day they change continents. This is going to continue allowing completely new pathogens to reach all of us. An example of an old story like that involves the fact that when modern humans left Africa, it looks like they took TB, the TB bacterium, with them. About a third of humanity carries TB. Far fewer ever get sick. But this is such an old pathogen that it is really a pathogen of humanity. When you study TB in different areas, people carry usually the TB variant that left Africa with their distant ancestors. And then there was a second wave during European colonialism in the last 500 years. Wherever Europeans arrived, they would bring with them the European TB that could then be overlaid on the local population. And potentially TB has a very, very old origin. It turns out that all human societies cook. All human societies know how to make fire at will using different varieties of friction fire or other ways. And what does fire do? Fire was instrumental in making days longer. It allows us to talk to each other at night. It introduces this magical time period where it gets dark and you don't have to sleep yet. You can sit around multiple generations telling stories, inventing magical stories, sharing meaning. But it damages your lungs and it brings you together. So there's a very interesting idea that the TB, which so characteristically infects humans around the world, might actually have been a liability of regular fire use, very often in enclosed spaces under a rock shelter or in a hut. There are other diseases that we will never lose because they keep jumping into us from animals. And one example is influenza A. Influenza A is very well understood because it caused this huge pandemic in 1918. And we now know influenza A is one of many, many similar viruses that live in wild waterfowl. These birds migrate from the South Pole to the North Pole. They poop and land in many places, and they can pass on the virus to humans or to pigs. And the virus can then jump back from humans to pigs or pigs to humans. It can recombine. And when it does so, it can cause really bad new epidemics. It turns out that this wild bird virus, mostly from aquatic birds, affects a lot of different species. And so people try to keep an eye on predicting, where might the next virus come from? We better be ready for the next virus. But this is a much better known virus than COVID-19, right? People have been tracking influenza for 100 years now. And it just shows you that even when you know that much more about a virus, we keep having regular influenza epidemic and pandemics. During 1918, the Spanish flu killed, millions of people worldwide. Unfortunately, COVID-19 now is close to having killed 1 million people in the US and 6 million people worldwide. So this is kind of a summary of zoonoses, diseases that jump from a non-human species to humans to great effect. And you can see how Ebola West Africa, we narrowly escaped something there, thanks to the incredible effort of the international community and West African people. They managed to mostly contain it there, but that was not the case for the COVID pandemic. I want to briefly change gears now, and I talked about rainforest. I'm going to talk about rainforests on your cells, which are really nanoforests. They are, 1 billion times smaller than rainforests. So what you see here is a cartoon of a cell, a human cell, for example, or a bird cell for that matter. And inside the cell is a nucleus that carries the genome, the DNA that defines you as a human, as opposed to a chimpanzee or a bonobo. And you often hear people say your genome is your blueprint. It's really a very poor analogy because a blueprint was written and drawn by somebody and somebody interprets it and you have contractors building it. Living cells do everything by themselves. They grow and develop from a fertilized egg, and that genome is expressed, and we understand how we go from DNA to proteins. The proteins are made in these regions of the cell, and they go through the cell and they come out to the surface. As they go through, these proteins are modified. Things are added to the proteins. This is known as a post-translational modification. One of the things added to proteins very often are sugar chains or glycans. And by the time these proteins come out, they're not just proteins, they're glycoproteins. And they give each of your cell a molecular flavor. And so a cell, like the initial cell you were a sperm and an egg, and they came together and they gave rise to you. Each cell type has a little rainforest of molecules that's very rich in sugars on its surface. So a red blood cell would look like this, a sperm like this, different flavor. A white blood cell, an immune cell, would again have a different composition of molecules on it. And an epithelial cell, that, like the one in your lung that a COVID virus would infect, a SARS-CoV-2 virus would infect, would look like that. So every one of your tissues and cell type has a molecular ecology. I like to call it a nano ecology that defines the cell type. But by the same time, each of these cells is actually telling your body that it is part of your body. It is not an infectious agent. It is not a virus. It is not a parasite. And one way it does that is that it carries a lot of molecules, millions of molecules that are called sialic acid, if you are a mammal. And sialic acid are a little sugar that is found at the very tip of these rainforests or kelp forests. So it's like the canopy of the forest, and it's used by your body to tell friend from foe, to tell that's my cell, I can chill out, I don't need to attack this cell. Oh, this cell looks cancerous or infected, I'd better do something, and call the infantry. By that, I mean the immune system. So the idea is that every one of your cells, all your tissues have these nanotropical forests on them, these canopies of molecules. And these molecules, they end in these cylic acid indicated here by these diamond symbols. And so that means that these molecules are really important for your body to decide that it's you, but they're also important for pathogens to realize that, oh, I'm in the lung of a human. It's time to hold on and invade because I have found my host. So that's cylic acid. And a better analogy than rainforests do move in a storm, but a much better analogy actually are kelp forests, like here along the West Coast, because these sugar chains are in a hydrated environment and they're constantly moving. So if you were to get into a kayak and paddle along the Pacific coast, you would see these kelp forests, and all these things you see on the surface would be the cylic acids. So that would tell you, I'm in the right place. I can now infect this host. So cylic acid biology, the study of how these cell surface sugars that are very rich in one particular monosaccharide called cylic acids, millions of copies per cell, they are involved in this race between hosts and pathogens, where you have parasites like malaria or viruses or bacteria that come in and try to get in and invade you. But at the same time, your own immune cells have special molecules on them that can tell that this is a bacterium, don't let it in. This bacterium is like a wolf in a sheep's clothing. It's trying to camouflage as self, but it just got caught by one of your receptors. And your immune system is constantly reading this molecular rainforest on all your cells to make sure that your cells are healthy and not infected. Why do I tell you that? Because it turns out that even though humans and all the other apes, we all have cylic acids on our cells, all the other apes have two different types of cylic acid on their cells, and humans alone among these species only have one type of cylic acid. We lost the capacity to make this other type of flavor, molecular flavor, that is found on all the other non-human apes. This is based on a mutation that we were able to time at over 2 million years ago. And what this means, and if you're interested in where this was published, this is where you can find it. So it's based on the fact that a single enzyme that is encoded by a gene in our genome lost its activity. There was a mutation that broke this enzyme, and that prevents us humans from turning this one sugar into its derived sugar, this sugar, that differs just by an oxygen, but it's completely different. Its immunological flavor is very different from this. Why is this a big deal? It's a single gene that changed, but if you were to illustrate this by landing on a red blood cell, as depicted here, and you make yourself 1 billion times smaller than you are, and you look around, and you can see that in humans, there is a single flavor of cylic acid indicated by red here, whereas in most other mammals, there are two different flavors of cylic acid. So if you're a virus or a malaria parasite, you either are good at infecting this or you're good at infecting that, which is why finally we understand why chimpanzee malaria cannot infect human malaria, and human malaria cannot infect chimpanzees, for example. So this is really an important determinant of which diseases are capable of jumping into you. And if you want to see an illustration of this, you see here a photograph of sperm of a chimpanzee that are stained with an antibody against the sugar that humans do not have. These are sperm from a fertile human male volunteer. They're stained with the same antibodies, and there is no staining. There is none of that sugar there. So chimpanzee sperm would look very weird to a human egg because they simply don't have the right flavor on them. So there is now a lot of genomic information where people can go around and study the whole genome of different species and ask, well, we knew that humans were weird because we lost the function of this. But it turns out that we were able to show that about 100 species of monkeys from the Americas, Central and South America, called the New World monkeys, they also don't have this particular sugar. And the same is true for bats. 2 independent times, entire groups of bats did away with this sugar. The same is true for pinnipeds, walruses, seals, and sea lions, and minks, and vervets, and raccoons. They also lost it. The same is true for hedgehogs. The same is true for white-tailed deer. You might have heard that they get a lot of COVID. The same is true for sperm whale as well. And even platypus doesn't have this sugar. What this means is that there are some animal species out there, including wild animals, that have a molecular flavor that is similar to humans. And the prediction would be if their diseases could jump on us very easily. And so if you go back to influenza A, it turns out that all the species highlighted here in pink, from the point of view of their outer canopy, what covers their cells, they're actually very human-like. And so maybe it shouldn't be so surprising that influenza A is such a big concern. And we need information like that because we need to be prepared to try to predict what determines that these nasty diseases in some animal that is barely known jumps into humans and then makes the difference. If we are prepared, we can block this off and not have a new pandemic. And we usually use vaccines to do that. And I was going to briefly talk about vaccines, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump over this. I just want to leave you with the thought that vaccines are very old, and people in ancient China, in 16th century China, well documented, knew how to take scabs from somebody with variola or smallpox and put that into someone to protect them from it, essentially inventing vaccination. I will jump over that. There are several diseases. People have been against vaccines, but thanks to vaccines, we have eradicated terrible diseases such as smallpox. We still have no vaccines against monkeypox, which unfortunately was introduced into the United States via the pet trade, but then controlled. Polio, we're almost there, but things like warfare and vaccine hesitancy are actually now helping polio survive. Hopefully we'll be able to get rid of polio altogether on the planet. I'm going to briefly end with pointing out that people have been very interested in studying African primates, so not primates of the Americas, but primates of the African continent. And almost every species of African primate has their own HIV-like virus that usually doesn't cause disease in these animals. So how did this virus jump via a combination of monkeys eaten by chimpanzees that then recombined and gave a virus that ended up in humans? We don't know, but it happened very, very recently. And it is connected to a perfect storm type of situation where you had incredible colonial brutality. You had the first big cities in Central Africa. You had people going between Haiti and Africa after the Belgians were thrown out of the Congo. And then you have the convergence of IV drug users, sex trade, and international traffic. And the next thing you know, you have a new pandemic of a bloodborne pathogen called HIV-1. But it goes the other way. We know now, based on studies at the very sites where I studied chimpanzees, that we, the conservation biologists coming from Europe and the United States, spending 1 or 2 years in very close contact to these animals, they're totally habituated, as you see on this photograph. We have passed on respiratory diseases such as rhinovirus and pneumoviruses that cause a swivel in you and me, but they can kill a chimpanzee. So there is a new appreciation that there are things like anthropognosis, the opposite of a zoonosis. It's an animal disease that jumps into non-human animals and causes massive disease. And so that's really important to be aware of. It goes both ways. And you've all heard there's a lot of interest in bats. Bats are phenomenal because they fly, they generate incredible heat and metabolic stress. Their immune systems actually allow for them to carry huge amounts of viruses without getting sick, which makes them flying viral Uber shuttles. They move viruses everywhere, and whenever they poop, they deposit more viruses. And so that's why bats have become so important. Ebola is linked to bats as well. Megabats, as you see here, these hammer-headed bats. And unfortunately, we have yet to figure out exactly what causes out the outbreaks, but we know it's linked to bats. Bats themselves are getting sick. They get fungal diseases. And unfortunately, when bats themselves get sick, they can carry more disease in their feces. So an idea of One Health should very much be focused on how do humans fit in with their diseases among the other animals. But we should ask the other questions. How do wildlife and other animals fit in with regard to diseases we can pass to them? You all know the huge effort by bat virologists in Wuhan on studying the bats in southern China all the way to Laos. Unfortunately, these people have been attacked massively and accused of starting the whole pandemic. There is zero evidence that they did that. We might never know, however. One of them, Zheng Li, who is the principal investigator, actually predicted what was going to happen in Wuhan in a paper the year before. We know that this idea of bringing big city populations together with wild foods is a very bad idea. Down here you see in Wuhan, the Huanan market that is pretty much been linked to the beginning of this epidemic. But we have plenty of examples of non-sustainable hunting of wildlife. There's just fewer infectious agents that jump from fish to mammals. But the minute you start smoking non-human primates and fruit bats, you open yourself up for all kinds of new epidemics. So in summary, I'm trying to convince you that humans have become a planet-altering force. Human contact with wildlife is ever more invasive as we push in more and more. Evolutionary change in human cell surface molecules, rainforests of their own, but nano rainforests, are shared with a lot of animal species and might help us explain why certain diseases jump from bats to humans that often. Wild animals can also be affected by novel diseases, and this can increase the chance of them spreading diseases to humans. We simply have to stop the uncontrolled pillaging of wild animals for human consumption. That is just too much of a risk. And we have to rethink how we use animals in the context of emerging diseases, spillover infections, antibiotic resistance. I didn't really have time to talk about that today. So we can only hope that humans' pro-social tendency, the fact that we can identify with groups, we can form groups of groups and find common stories that hold us together, will allow us to take better care of each other and the life support system that our planet provides. This is my little slide on why it is worth to ask questions about where humans come from, because we are now driving the planet in many ways. And I think a better understanding of our origins can give us some realistic ways to try to intervene. So I thank you for that. And I will end on advertising another symposium we have that has as title, The Planet Altering Apes. It's in May 13th. It is virtual, and you're all invited to go to the website that you see here. You can log in, you can sign in, and you will get an announcement. And of course, you can listen in on this very interesting symposium. Thanks very much, and I apologize for the technical glitches. Hopefully we have a few moments for questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for an incredible presentation. You have covered a lot of ground, and I hope that we will get lots of questions. Folks, we have Q&A, so please put your questions into Q&A. Pascal, I was fascinated by your statement that bats are flying Uber shuttles of disease. I love that statement. They certainly have been taking a hit here in the Northeast. White nose syndrome has really had incredible impacts upon a whole slew of cave-dwelling species here. It's kind of interesting. I don't think I'd actually seen the information related to them having actually higher potential for other diseases like coronaviruses because of the impact of white nose.
I think the thought is that they have phenomenal immune systems to begin with due to their unique biology. They are the only actively flying mammal. Right? Mammals are hot-blooded, and when they fly, physiologically, it's an incredible feat. So interestingly, they have changed in the genetics. You can see that they have literally turned off certain antiviral responses that allow them to be infected by viruses without getting sick. And if you now challenge their immune system with a huge fungal onslaught, for example, then the scary thing is that it might affect how many viruses they start producing and where they deposit them. So it's one of the synergism. It's reminiscent of Vanessa Ezenwa's work that showed that when ruminants are infected by helminths, they actually produce more methane. It's another way that suddenly the animal disease is not just the loss of money for the herder, but actually affects all of us because the animal does something that is shared globally, like farting more, right?
Yeah. Well, I know that U.S. Fish and or not U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but USDA Wildlife Services is greatly involved in surveillance of wildlife. Has there been an uptick in their surveillance of like bats?
I'm not sure that there is a global answer to that. I think it very much depends on which societies you're talking about. clearly all over Southeast Asia, there is now a huge effort to go and surveil bats. But that was already in place because of things like Nipah viruses, for example, right?
Right.
That was a bat virus in Southeast Asia that would go to pigs and do really bad things. But now all the interest in Laos, for example, where people found new variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that are actually a better ancestor for what happened in Wuhan than some of the stuff found in China. So I think the good news is there is a lot of bat biology. There is even a bat, a mega and a mini bat colony in Singapore that's very well funded, doing research on bats, and not only for virology. It turns out bats have very low cancer rates and they heal very rapidly. They have to. Their skin cannot have a hold for a long time, right? So they have, they have all these biological processes linked to flight that people are interested in. I see 2 questions in the chat. Can I address those?
Yes, I will read those to you. So this is from Claire. Fascinating presentation. I'm very curious about the women in menopause age slide. When there are so many cultures patriarchal, the women curating and passing culture makes so much sense.
Yes, that's a really interesting question. So the thing is, if you keep grandmothers alive, you will also keep a few grandfathers alive, right? Because males die more at every stage of life, except very early embryogenesis. All the rest, every stage of life, men die more, which is why by the time you're 70, they're totally outnumbered by women, but they're still there. And interestingly, males seem to be disproportionately involved in making the rules, especially since you start writing them down. Up until very recently, literacy rates were, a few % per society, and almost all of them were men. A lot of traditions actually keep women actively away from writing and reading, which makes it even easier for the old guys to make the rules. So it's a fascinating question. And I know there's a lot of interest in asking, well, was there a power grab by the males? It's almost impossible to answer that. There is no evidence of pre-existing completely female-dominated societies. They might have existed, but clearly since farming, there is precious little evidence of societies where you don't have all these infamous double standards, where yes, there are rules, and surprise, surprise, the punishments are always harder on women and men get away with doing much more, which to me is proof positive that these rules were invented by men. But how it got to that is a fascinating question that, that we need a couple of more talks on that.
I would add into that, from my own experience, it is certainly grandmothers that hold families together. When you have grandmothers pass on, then it seems like the social connections do not hold as well without the presence of those grandmothers.
That's a great point. I should add that there is some pretty strong evidence that the maternal grandmothers are particularly important. And that goes back to some very basic mammalian biology, right? The only grandmother that knows that the grandchildren are hers is the maternal grandmother.
Yeah. So we have another question here from Olivia. Do you think it could be possible for non-human animals to evolve to be able to conceptualize non-physical ideas in the way that humans do? Is that possible with the pressure that humans are currently putting on the planet and other species, or would this be possible if humans were removed from the equation? Would another species rise up to take our place?
Yes, the raccoons, of course. No, it's a great question. It's a great question. And it really, when you spend so much time, as I do, trying to figure out why we're such a messed up ape. And you can have it both ways. You can say, how are we such an amazing ape, right? But in many ways, we're not so amazing. We're really terrible at making life terrible for ourselves and all our fellow beings, including all the other species. The bizarre thing is there is really strong evidence it only happened once, right? I mean, 30,000 years ago, there were several species of humans on the planet. Why did they all disappear? And it's only us now. There is no evidence for anybody else telling stories. There is no proof that orcas are not doing philosophy when we're not listening, or we don't know how to listen properly. So we don't have evidence that orcas do not have language, but we do not have any evidence that they have the capacity to tell stories, to make up things where they share their brains. I can talk to you about somebody who never even existed and start spinning a tale about the past and the future and why it matters and why you should believe me. And I possibly have a chance to convince you. And we just don't have evidence for other species. But I mean, I would be absolutely thrilled if somebody can prove that in other animal communication, which they all communicate in amazing ways, you know, but it's not communication about stories. It's communication about relevant information, you know, who wants to mate with whom, where is food, and so forth. What language allows you to do is it creates new and infinite meaning. You can just make up anything you want, including your favorite woman in the sky, her absence, or why it's not a woman, but a dude with a beard, and so forth, right? That's what you can do with language. So I'm eagerly awaiting hard evidence from non-human species that tell stories. So far, I've not seen a single bit of evidence of that.
And we have one other statement from Claire. All hail the trash pandas. And perhaps that is a good place to stop. We are over our time. Pascal, as my last time I heard you speak, I am completely enthralled with the work that you're doing and all of the subjects that you've stepped on here. We could probably talk for hours and hours about this, but thank you so very much for being with us tonight. And thank all of you who attended. I hope that you have enjoyed this even half as much as what I have. I hope you all have a great evening. Go ahead.
No, thank you all very much. And if you want to contact me, you can find me on UCSD Pascal Gagneux. Should be easy.
And keep in mind that this is videotaped and will be up on our website here shortly. I hope that you share it broadly with others because I think this has been an incredibly important topic. And I think it's really worth spreading the word to other people as well. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you all.
Stay safe.
Have a great night or the rest of your afternoon.
And tell stories. Make sure to tell stories. Take advantage of it.
That's what I do in my classes. I just tell stories. So. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.